Come on, thingy. No, you're fine. I'm just trying to.
No, we just finished breakfast, so we're fine. Down in the name tag place, we just have a
All right. Well, I'm already.
Oh, it doesn't work?
Well, it's for whatever reason, it really, really wants me to do vertical, but I don't want to do vertical. I don't know why. That's annoying.
Here, let me get this out of your way.
No, it's not.
You sure? No, yeah, it's mine way.
It's telling me the orientation is locked. I feel like I'm having a senior moment, but I'm too young. I'm too young to like figure that out.
Actually, I'm not too sure myself, but
Thank goodness for video editing. All right, well, without further ado, we're gonna go ahead and dive in because I don't want to cut off time that we have here together today. So I think this should be an interesting challenge for us to approach. We will see if the idea of heresies, what they are, how those things were initially defined, all that kind of stuff is still applicable, relevant, worth us knowing about, worth us being familiar with. And so I'll explain a little bit in a minute about how I got interested in this as a topic. I'm going to slide this slightly over there. Okay, cool. And I want to begin by just saying this is a topic that makes a lot of people nervous, right? Who's nervous about this? And why is it that we're nervous about this? I think a lot of times it's because we've caught fire maybe from others who think that some aspect of our own way of being Christian doesn't meet someone else's expectations or definitions. Probably we haven't been outright called a heretic before, although it is possible. It's not usually a word that people still use, but there are a lot of ways to call someone a heretic without calling them a heretic, right? And yet, there is some merit behind what it's trying to point at when we use this word, because ultimately what heresy is a belief or a practice that over time the church has deemed this leads down a destructive path. Either how you think of yourself in relation to the world, how you think of God, how you see your engagement with it, and it can affect people's behavior and moral choices and all that kind of stuff. So I want to share this series as a little bit of insight for all of you. If you've ever heard, oh, those Episcopalians are too progressive or liberal in their theology, or if you've ever heard like, okay, but this tradition or that tradition has a corner on the market of what is actual, acceptable, unchanging historic Christianity. Well, when you leave this series, the goal is that you'll know exactly what those initial definitions are. You'll also be able to spot all the drift that people put on it, because people are always coming up with new things. They think, well, this is also heresy and this is also heresy. And you'll know from the beginning, nope, it was these things. And therefore, what you're saying is an allowable difference of thought. And you'll understand exactly how we got these ideas that kind of give us a shared foundation to begin with. So I'm hoping that this class can be a way for you to feel comfortable in your own knowledge of kind of what this initial Christian story and its foundations are, so that you can push back against those ideas. Now, obviously these words, heresy, orthodoxy, have a lot of baggage, and that's what I want to spend some time unpacking. Are they worthy of reclaiming? Should we just chuck them into the waste bin and move on? What exactly are we to do with these things? Who gets to use these words? So, let's see here. I found some much funnier ones, but this one is I thought this one was tame enough for Sunday school. So this is what we're going to be up to. And I want to drive this home from the very beginning and make this real by sharing a bit of a personal story about how I personally have encountered this. And then we can branch out and talk about all the other ways that people encounter this concept. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s in that, now much discussed, reminisced about, critiqued era of youth 90s culture and what was going on in the 90s in the church, among other things. Does anybody remember? What was the big anxiety or thing that people were bracing themselves for? There's a clue right over my shoulder. Yeah, Y2K was a thing, and so, but it's interesting to think, like, what was underneath the fear of, like, the calendar changing? Obviously, there's the technical, like, well, what if the computers all die all of a sudden? Yes. There's that piece. But also, the world was changing. The world was changing fast. There was a sense of lingering, like, anxiety and dread about how this new change could render us vulnerable. And in Christian circles, one of the ways that this cropped up, amongst others, was a whole new fad in Christian theology, and I'm calling it a fad. I think initially sparked by, well, we can go all the way back to the Schofield Bible in the late 1800s, but Hal Lindsey in his late Great Planet Earth book, which then was the impetus behind the whole Left Behind book series that came a little bit later. But there was this sense that the world was about to come to an end, and everybody had a different understanding of what that was going to look like. Is it going to be happy? Are we going to be caught up in the tribulation, the turmoil? Is it going to be really stressful and chaotic and violent? Or are we going to be whisked away before that ever happens? And you had churches that had hammered out doctrines that said, well, it's going to be this, or it's going to be this, or it's going to be this. Now, in the Episcopal Church, there probably were a few corners where that was being discussed, but for the most part, we didn't join that conversation. But it's worth knowing that this was a big part of the conversation in the evangelical and Baptist worlds, so it was kind of in the water at that time. And the way that it touched me, amongst others, was I went to a church that very much dwelt on this kind of rapture, God's coming, and we're all going to be whisked up into the sky theology, and was very convinced that I would not live to see adulthood. And if you can imagine, that's not a healthy way to be a kid, because it puts all this pressure on you, thinking like, well, I've only got a little bit of time, so what am I going to do with it? And I kind of, I don't bring this up a whole lot, but I got married when I was 21. That marriage didn't last. It didn't last because it was made for all kinds of bad reasons. But one of the main ones was this sense of pressure, like, well, I'm never going to get to be an adult and grow up. And I offer this personal story, not to make you all feel sad for me, although I think you do, but to show how bad theology really can affect someone's life. It can lead to bad decisions. And that's just a personal example of how it touched my life. But it's also why I think it's so important that we try to get our theological underpinnings, if we want to go deeper and really understand exactly what it is that we're doing, why we try to get these things right, or at least in a healthy way. And when orthodoxy and its study and heresies and all that stuff is done best, that's the aim. It's to try and help us to not adopt a perspective that teaches us we have to stay in an abusive marriage, or not to adopt an outlook on the world and caring for creation that teaches us that we don't have to care for the environment because all of this is going to go up in flames soon. Anyway, going to be whisked off to heaven, so nothing that's here on the earth matters. Or why we might not want to conflate our identity as Americans or whatever our nationality is with Christianity and blend those things together in a way that causes us to see political concerns as somehow being God's concerns in a direct one-to-one way, right? Christian nationalism is kind of the phrase that's being used a lot for that right now. Is that a heresy? You'll find out in class 2 or 3, I think. What about, has anybody ever heard the idea if someone is struggling with anxiety or depression, don't get on medicine, just pray harder.
Yeah.
If your heart was right with God, would you have that anxiety? It's out there. And there are all kinds of other iterations of this, but this notion that like we don't need medicine, we just have to believe harder. So these are all examples of how I think this is still a live issue in our world today. So let's see here. A little bit about how we got the term. Wait a second. Is that what I wanted? This one here. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Who's heard of the ecumenical councils? All right. So essentially, these were the meetings that happened in the first several hundred years of Christianity. The first one that people often cite, depending on when you start counting, is the council at Jerusalem, which is in the book of Acts in chapter 15. It's a coming together of all the Christian leaders at that time, mostly bishops, and they would meet, they would debate, they would listen to each other, they would pray, they would invite the Holy Spirit's leading, and eventually they would discern this is what we think God is leading us to hold as true. Sometimes they would circle back, realize they hadn't yet had a complete picture, and they needed to do a little bit more crafting. I think we've all seen how that can work in our own life. But these meetings were called the ecumenical councils, and they give us a model for how we as Christians should approach hard decisions. You know, you hear the word discernment thrown around a lot in the Episcopal Church, and it's meant to convey something a little bit different than just a cost-benefit analysis or other kind of typical ways of making decisions that you see in the corporate world today, because we expect that somehow God's going to be involved in this decision that we're trying to make. How do we discern if God is involved in a decision that we're trying to make?
Yes.
My favorite way is to look for the fruits of the Spirit. Is this decision bringing about love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, all that stuff? Are those the fruits? Or is this breeding further abuse and hostility or suffering? And not suffering for righteousness' sake, but like just unneeded suffering. Think of staying in a marriage where one person's being abused. And yet all over we see how that specific thing has been put upon others as a burden to carry throughout history, needlessly. So the church began from the beginning this model for getting together attempting to discern what God was up to. They started initially with simple things like, are Gentiles allowed? And if Gentiles are allowed, how are they allowed? Do they have to become like us? Do they have to be circumcised? Do they have to follow all the Sabbath rules? Or is this something different now? And if it is, what does that mean? So, let's look at kind of the origin of the word real fast. So what is heresy anyway? The Greek word heresis means choice or faction. A heretic in the early church context was someone who took one part of Christian truth and ran with it to the exclusion of the rest. So heresy is not just an error, it is a distortion of truth that threatens the integrity of the gospel and or human flourishing, right? So this is interesting to think about, because how do we get to a conclusion that is in some way harmful? Often it's not because we set out trying to be bad or villains, right? Instead, we're usually trying to do something good, but just overlooking something or overemphasizing something. Maybe we put all of our eggs in one basket and say, this is the whole thing, and we're setting something meaningful aside, maybe because it makes things a little complicated or creates a little bit of tension, and we want to, naturally, we want to resolve any sense of felt tension. We want that sense of peace with whatever it is. We want things to be easily understandable, and so we can oversimplify things, probably out of a positive initial impulse. We can exaggerate a truth as well. I put an example emphasizing Jesus' divinity at the expense of his humanity. That is one of the initial heresies. We'll talk about some of these words that you don't yet probably know. We'll talk about what exactly they are, and later we'll look for modern examples of this in our world. Do we have Docetism in our world? Do we have Arianism in our world? I was listening to something this morning, just kind of getting my thoughts flowing for today, and I heard a new illustration for Arianism I'd never heard before, and so that's present in our world and in many churches near you. And so we will learn about that as well. Let's see here. There's a couple good quotes that I think help us kind of hone in a little bit more. Heresy is the refusal to stay within the mystery. Any G.K. Chesterton fans out there? Oh my gosh. Okay, good. We've got a few. For the rest of you, check it out. Wonderful voice in Anglican Christianity and writer and all that. But what do you think he's getting at with this? Refusal to stay within the mystery. Within is a key word, right? Because there's some sort of bounds that's being pointed to. Yeah.
Is he saying, don't think about it too much, don't try to figure it out?
Well, so the hubris of thinking we can always figure it out is what comes to my mind when I think of the word mystery, right? Because, Richard Rohr has this saying, what is truth, when we're talking about theological truth? It's not something that's pinpointable and knowable. It's something that's infinitely unknowable, right? And at the same time knowable. And mystery is kind of like that. We talk about Holy Eucharist or the Trinity as examples of divine mystery, right? And so we can learn we can read one book about the sacraments, fully understand what that book has to say about them, and it may say 20 different things. We have not exhausted all there is. And so the idea that we can exhaust something is what he's pushing back against, I think, when he uses this word. The other quote I put on here, all heresies are ultimately inadequate simplifications. This one's interesting to me because I think all of us, we're not always super comfortable with that not having the feeling of not having something totally pinned down. We want it. We want that certainty. And so the temptation is strong to say, oh, it's getting complicated. I'm just going to say this. I do that all the time. And I recognize, like, we can't let ourselves, do away with our own humility and decide that we've fully figured something out by simplifying it and refusing to contend with the complexity. A quick example of that would be in seminary. I attended some Presbyterian, kind of in the Reformed tradition classes on theology, and there's this whole stuff about, like, has anybody heard the whole, like, election, predestination, all that kind of stuff? Like, I learned that stuff so much and really didn't like it and pushed against it a lot and wanted to understand it better and still didn't like it and was looking into whatever. Point is, like, there's a part of me that just gets exhausted when you try to have that conversation, when you try to unpack what's going on there. And it's real tempting for me to, like, want to avoid it, sidestep it, and just say, it's this, and just kind of oversimplify it. And that would be a gateway for me, I guess, into possible heresy, right? So we're called not to necessarily just cast complicated things aside. I put a few other contemporary examples in here in my notes. God just wants you to be happy, Pelagianism. Spirituality is good, religion is bad. It's a new form of Gnosticism. Jesus was just a good moral teacher. Who's heard that before? That's Arianism, by the way. That was one of the first. If you believe hard enough, nothing bad will happen to you. That's alive and kicking, right? And it's not just within Christianity. One of the other things I saw in looking at this, kind of refreshing myself, we think sometimes that heresy comes from outside the church. No. But it actually usually comes from inside the church. But this one is kind of an example that you see all outside the church as well. This, if you believe hard enough, bad things will not happen to you. What is the... what is that? Magical thing. No, it'll come back to me. I want to use the phrase New Age, but there's this kind of, like, claim it, believe it kind of idea. So let's see. The story of, I want to get into at least one of these things. There was a slide you were supposed to be seeing. Okay, this is, let me just make sure I'm still, okay, yes. All right. Quick story. Council of Nicaea, regarded as the first official ecumenical council, happened in the year 325. Bonus points, who called this council for its first meeting? Constantine, right? Anybody know why? Because you got all these pesky Christians with different ideas about what Christianity is, and it's really hard to pull an empire together if you don't have unity. Good motivations. God can work through even broken processes, even broken people like us, right? So this group comes together, bishops from all over the region, and they're there to try and hash through some of the controversies of that moment. So they meet in the city of Nicaea. The church was, at the time, fighting over Jesus's identity and who Jesus actually was. Was Jesus divine, like God? Was Jesus created by God? Does that even matter? Is there some sort of distinctive or difference if you take one position or another? There was a priest named Arius who was insisting that Jesus was less than God. And many, this is something I can relate to, many found that understanding of who Jesus was easier to understand. And so, why is that a problem? Well, others were basically saying, well, if he's just a man, or if he was just created, then how is he capable of any kind of salvation? If there's no divinity to him. So the bishops got there together, and this was following a period of heavy Christian persecution. So a lot of these people were missing limbs or missing eyes from the persecution they had suffered. They knew firsthand what it meant to stand up and take a stand for Christ in their lifetime. According to the stories of tradition, the tensions at this meeting ran high, so much so that our very own beloved Saint Nicholas slapped Arius or punched Arius across the face. Everybody's heard this story, right? You know, like every December 7th on Facebook, I see the memes that have like the picture of Saint Nicholas, and it says, you know, Merry Christmas, go punch a heretic or something. That's why, because theoretically or according to the lore, that's what actually happened. The outcome of this first council, the council at Nicaea, shouldn't be super surprising to you, because it's the creed, Nicene Creed, right? That's what we say every Sunday, and it gives kind of a rough, in one sense you could say it kind of creates the bounds around what is Orthodox Christianity. In another way, you could say it gives us a shared foundation. There's some interesting things to tease out there. Why does it mention Pontius Pilate, for example? Well, it locates this flow of story in a punctiliar, provable, historical moment. Some of the other stuff, what do we do with the virgin birth and all this kind of stuff? And I was having a conversation with someone, I've had a conversation about this many times over the years. What do we do with those lines in the creeds that we still have questions about, or that we have our own skepticism about? And it can be any number of things. What does this mean? What is this perspective trying to capture? And this is where I like to offer that in the church, Catholic, meaning universal, right? Which is one of the words in the creed. When we say the Holy Catholic Church, we're not talking about Rome. Rome did not exist yet at the time. I mean, as a city it did, but the Roman Church did not exist yet as anything distinct or even special at that point in 325. So we're talking about like a holistic sense, like the people up in Turkey, the people down on Northern Africa, the people up in the British Isles. That's what we're talking about when we say the Holy Catholic Church. And what we need to understand, I suppose, is that the church as a whole helps hold this for us collectively. So if I'm praying next to someone on a Sunday and they have a problem with one part of it because they're struggling to see if it's applicable or makes sense, and maybe I don't have a problem with that part, maybe my problem is with a different part, together we hold it collectively because the church is a community. You know, we put a lot of emphasis at this moment in history on our little beliefs. And are our little beliefs correct or accurate or exactly what they should be? And one of the things we'll start to get as we look at more and more of these is that, you know, all these people probably had their weird little beliefs like we do. It's about what we discern together and how that informs how we live that really gives shape to the world that we're creating together. So, how am I doing on time so far? Oh, not bad. Very good. We're going to actually get to talk about stuff, I think. Yeah, because I do want to have some discussion with you guys. Let me make sure I've gotten through the things that I want to get through real fast. Let me pause and just say, any questions so far? Something you want me to circle back to, elaborate on? See here and here. So yeah.
Your paintings of Nicaea.
Yeah.
Which, do you know which?
Nicholas, Arius.
Okay.
Yeah, he's about to slap that guy.
Yeah. How about the other one?
Same.
Is it
Yeah,
same?
this is Nicholas.
Okay, so it's a tough line. I just
Yeah.
wondered.
I didn't actually know, sometimes when you do an image search, you don't know what to expect. I didn't know that I was going to find these, particularly this one because it's quite old. And so it's kind of interesting that like at some point, some iconographer thought like, this is a moment I need to capture as in some way. And what's the story or truth that this is supposed to be saying to us?
Arian's bad.
Yeah.
I noticed that Nicholas has a halo, but Arius does not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was.
Good catch. Yeah.
The way they are.
He almost looks.
And he looks kind of like he's trying to reason with him, like, come on, don't you understand? Let me convince you.
I was just saying, it's like
Yeah.
Saint Nicholas slapped somebody. Oh my God! This jolly old Saint Nick not? Oh no!
He did all kinds of great things. Yes. He's one of the more colorful saints, really. Yeah.
Was there like a political advantage to Constantine in choosing orthodoxy over Arianism? Because understanding was Arianism was probably more popular at the time.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I haven't looked at that before, but I bet that would be something that somebody's written about. Usually there is, right? Usually it's multifaceted. And so with other things, there's always that political dimension as well. So it'd be interesting to see.
Because Constantine
Yeah.
himself wasn't like a devout Christian.
Yeah, yeah.
So, there's
He wasn't like a Sunday school teacher. Who,
Well, his mother made him convert,
Yeah.
supposedly.
I guess I have a question. If Christians got together today,
Mhm.
could they come up with a creed? We've gotten
So-
so diverse, and I also have problems with the Council at Nicaea because it wasn't the people getting together,
Yeah.
it was half the people getting together.
Yeah,
They forgot the women.
yeah, yeah.
Just say it.
And this, yeah, let's see, let me see if I can touch on those, because those are important points. So, yeah, see, half, and then, what was the first thing you said?
Could we as Christians?
Oh, yes.
You know,
So,
We kept, it looks like Christianity just kept splitting and
Right.
splitting and splitting. If you tried to have a council, would there be lots of Nicholases trying to slap down?
oh yeah, it'd be brutal, and today we have the internet. So, but let's talk about that. So when we say ecumenical councils, that word is used on purpose. Ecumenical is obviously a way of conveying like, that's, if our youth group gets together with a Presbyterian and a Lutheran youth group, and we all go and do something together, which we do, that's an ecumenical youth group, right? It's across denominational differences. And so when we say ecumenical council, there's kind of this implied acknowledgement that you've got people from all over coming together to kind of hash through things. But back then, there wasn't quite as much difference. There wasn't a whole lot of denomination stuff yet. You had sects, like we'll use Arianism, for example. You had the people that really thought, okay, this guy's got, he's made some sense of this, and I adopt his perspective as being the true one. So you had some factions forming, but you didn't have like a separate Arian denomination. It's kind of similar to how I was saying, in 325, there was no such thing as the Roman Catholic Church as anything that we would recognize today, because the church hadn't split into different groups yet. So that's why there is a limited number of ecumenical councils. There's only 7, because after the 7th one, there wasn't another one called. And then the church, the East and West church, divided into East and West in 1054. And so after that, it would have been really difficult to get everybody to come together and hash through some new question or difference. And obviously that's just continued, right? right? So, people talk about how many thousands of denominations there are these days. I think a lot of times people are being a little bit generous with what they're considering a denomination, and it's not super helpful, because if it's just one little church in Kentucky, is that really a denomination? But it would be improbable for people to be able to get together. Now, what did happen, I think in the maybe the 1900s, there was an ecumenical movement in the early 1900s that resulted in the World Council of Churches. And one of the things, I've got a book that every seminarian has to read called something really exciting, like Baptism and Eucharist, whatever. But there was an effort to say, well, what are the things we absolutely do agree on that we can all, And so there have been little moments like that in history. In fact, a while back we did that class on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. One of his big positions as a job was being kind of like the European representative for that World Council of Churches group, out there in the world, meeting with other Christian groups around. Let's see. So here's what I want to do. Next week, we're going to get into Gnosticism. Gnosticism, we'll talk more in depth, but it's premised on this idea that there are some especially enlightened people out there who have had mystical experiences, which gives them special knowledge that none of the rest of us can have. But your goal should be to become like them, so that you too can become enlightened with this special knowledge. And that is coupled with a devaluing of the physical aspects of this world. So our body, the material world that surrounds us, and all the emphasis is placed on the spiritual. None of this matters. It's only about my spirit that goes to heaven, that kind of a thing. And it's really interesting to start thinking, and so that's why I'm planting the seeds now, so you can think about it this week. What are some things going on in the news where you can, in your mind, try to unpack, why would somebody say something like that? What are they prioritizing? What are they valuing? Is it shaped in any way by this idea that there are some people that have the magic knowledge that no one else has? Or is it in some way making a decision based upon a conception that the only thing that actually has eternal merit or value is the spiritual and not the material? There are a lot of Christian traditions right now in the world that come to those types of conclusions, that devalue the physical and place all of the emphasis on the spiritual only. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that next week. But what I want us to consider now, and so what I want to ask you to do at your tables, is to have a little bit of a conversation about these questions, and then we'll come back together and kind of share what you guys heard at your tables. So the first one is, why do you think people are drawn to spiritual ideas that are partly true but not fully? So I want us to think a little bit about that at our tables. And then if you get finished with that one, have you ever encountered a teaching that sounded good but seemed a bit off? Have you ever preached a sermon that felt like that? What's the risk of labeling something as heresy today? And what's the risk in not doing it? So, talk to yourselves. We'll regather in just a second, all right?
Just enough proof
Well, think of used car sales. It's going to tell you how the good things about the car, but not the bad. That's the way I sort of look at them. I'm not talking about mainline churches. I'm talking about some of the ones that arise in this, with my experience in the South, where and people start, they know that's right. I'll get a paycheck or something. In other words, there's a goal that God's going to give you. You know, is it Jimmy Swaggart that used to promise things? If you pray hard enough, you'll, you know.
prosperity.
Yeah. That's what I was typing about, you know, car. I'm not trying to make fun of them, but the belief this is good. You know, everybody's going to reach a reward. You know, go back to the Bible and say that's impossible. But they, Barbara knows that I went to school, daycare type school, with Billy Graham's daughters. And I did see the second coming. The second coming. Because guess who got to play Jesus? Baby Christ. And all these people were, oh, yes, Lord, please, that's
Why do you they're drawn to spiritual things? I think they don't have enough
Something that was there somehow. That seems like a basic very it was hard.
When my friend told me about that, I mean, there's where feeling, but
they're drawn to it. They don't have grounding. So it sounds good, but it might be a little off, but you don't know why, and you can't go back to history, to philosophy, to figure
Number two.
What's the risk of labeling something as heresy? I'm reading the third one. What's the risk of labeling something as heresy today? What's the risk of not?
We'll take one more minute. You guys are all, calm down a little bit.
What do you think?
You're getting too exercised.
Nobody hit each other.
Yeah.
We told Nicholas to go home. What's the risk of labeling something as heresy? Do you have enough wisdom to know what it is that's heresy? I mean, and your heresy might be somebody else's. And so,
Someone else's thoughts and beliefs.
So it's you. You're saying, I'm using the example of the preachers who used to go out and they would gather money from people didn't have. They were giving up what they're getting for the reason they could pay this guy. And, there was a couple on television. Whatever his name.
What's the risk of not really having like as a growth?
Grows into something that really sounds good.
But it's bad.
Are we all gonna pray for Robert? Yeah, are we all gonna pray for him or say thank God you're going to go?
Okay, if we could bring it back just because we have a limited amount of time. I don't mean to cut things short, but I do want to hear from a few of the tables about what ideas were brought up. So let's start with that first question. Why are we drawn to spiritual ideas that are partly but not fully true? Anybody have something to share from their table? Yeah.
One of my four sisters refers to, well, even like Joel Osteen, mostly because the messages, I've never seen them say like this church is voting on that as a spark of the case. Say that she loves this message of joy and love and giving. And she makes those kinds of choices and then it comes down to like she'll PBS and a great cartoon that's happy to go home versus the news, she'll take the happy go home. And I think it feels, she's afraid of how bad it feels to feel bad about it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, she's afraid. Always wants that. Always wants that.
Yeah.
It makes you feel better.
So it's essentially like emphasizing one aspect. Yeah. And there's a part of me that wants to say, well, whatsoever is good, joyful, dwell on these things. Yeah. What else?
I think sometimes
Yeah.
spiritual ideas, they're drawn to healing in some way. People feel so desperate for their family or themselves, their children, that they'll put their belief in something that's maybe not really fully true, but they want to believe because they want to believe it.
Desperation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of the same.
What else? Yeah.
We were talking about how sometimes in the process of doing something within a church, we can feel manipulated, guilted,
Yeah.
and maybe lose the essence of what they were trying to teach.
Mm-hmm. We get tunnel vision sometimes and forget
Right.
the world outside of us here.
I don't know
Yeah.
if it happens in the Episcopal Church. We were talking about the Roman Catholic Church, but I think it could be in any church.
I think any grouping of people is,
Right.
yeah, yeah. Anybody else on this first one? Have you ever encountered a teaching that sounded good but a little off?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that you're a sinner from your mother's womb, I hate
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It's like, and then this morning, was it, I can't remember which, it was a song or something, one of them was like, God knew you from your mother's womb. It's like,
Jeremiah
how
1, yeah.
How could I be a sinner if he knew me?
Yep.
I don't know like that, but it's like, that sinner from my mother's womb just sounds so bad.
Yeah.
It just-
So that would maybe be an example of if you hone in on that one
Yeah.
thing and you kind of forget all the other important things, then you're over elevating something. And there are churches that really hone in on that one thing, right?
That's sometimes how cults get started up.
Yeah.
Use the word. Is it,
So that's an easy to point to example of where we're kind of overemphasizing something and leading ourselves astray. Because it gets complicated when you start adding other layers, right? So, what else? Yeah.
We talked about the prosperity gospel.
Uh-huh.
That's being one of the things that sounds really good, but not quite there.
One of the things about the prosperity gospel that I find interesting is we can identify it in its most blatant form. Give us $1,000 and you'll receive back tenfold. But it's so much harder to identify when it, there's so many like more toned down ways that are also prosperity gospel. Even down to like, if I pray hard enough, my cancer will go away. How are they really different when you analyze what's being asked of you and what you're expecting in return? What about the last question up here, and then we'll move on. Are there risks to not labeling something heresy? Are there any good reasons to label something heresy? Allowing something to go unchecked, if you will. In some ways we talk about how the world we live in is so divided, but at the same time, I think all of us, for the most part, don't want to be a part of that or add to it. And wouldn't it just add to it for us to call someone else out as being in some way wrong? Yeah.
Well, I think it's also plenty of examples of when a human being attempts to twist Christianity in some way and use it to exploit others or dominate others. That needs to be called out when it happens. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Did anybody, when they saw this question, think of like a specific example that they think of for this? The question 3, sorry.
What's going on here?
I can't think of a,
Yeah.
well, I think it closes your mind to thinking, like if you've been raised in a way that you believe is orthodox and you run into an idea, it's much easier to just label it and move on and never really say, well, what are they really saying?
Yeah.
But really, you take responsibility for thinking about what you don't believe or what you do believe.
An interesting example. So one of it, you could read this and say the risk of labeling something as heresy or not labeling something as heresy. How do you do that? Maybe if you're a speaker, you present a message, you make a video, you write an article. What are the different things? Well, the Pope in 1925 started Reign of Christ Sunday because following World War I, he had seen the dangers of nationalism and how all the countries had kind of armed up and gone to war with each other and all the destruction that caused. And the Pope really wanted to avoid that replaying in the future. Of course, we know it did, World War II, but you can't blame the Pope for not trying. And the way that the Pope tried was put a date on the church calendar and said, on this day, I want you to focus on this thing. And the thing is, the thing for those of us who claim to follow Jesus is not the country we belong to. That's not our ultimate loyalty. Our loyalty is to God. And if we focus on that and what creating the world God wants us to live in, then I'm going to be more concerned with my neighbors than if I'm concerned about these fictitious lines we draw in the sand where my country starts or ends, right? And my concerns stop and yours begin, that kind of thing. So it's interesting to think about how the church has tried to engage this type of conversation in the past. Yeah?
Specific examples that you asked. I don't want to say anything, but I'm thinking 3 right away, pretty modern ones. Heaven's Gate, the People's Temple of the Disciples of Christ. Note that they branched off from an Orthodox Christian denomination. And then the branch of David over in Waco. I mean, those were all very bad. Being told, well, you're not open enough, and you're just being divisive, and yada, yada, yada. Well, these people were killing other people and themselves. I mean, come on.
So how do we figure it out?
Right, yeah.
Well,
We look at the fruit, right?
going back to the question on the Pope,
Yeah.
Mussolini was in about that time.
Yeah.
How did he get passed? I mean, what was the reaction? Here you have the Catholic leader in a
Yeah.
Catholic country saying, but that's not what Mussolini was saying.
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
I mean,
So that was a way that he was taking a stand, right? That
Right.
put him at odds with the government.
so, I mean, I'm just asking what happened to us? Did it just sort of quietly disappear, or did he try to keep it up? In other words,
Let's circle back to that.
okay.
I want to ask this real fast. In this series, when you think about kind of what you've heard today and what we might be just jumping into in the future, do you have any questions that you're hoping we get into about the councils, the creeds, the topic of heresy or orthodoxy? Are there any areas that you're like, oh, I hope we kind of address this? Yeah.
I already talked to you about this earlier this week, but there's a part of the Nicene Creed I don't literally believe. And what you said about somebody else maybe doesn't totally believe something else. So between your belief and their unbelief, and my unbelief and their belief, we're still holding the whole together. And really that's what that whole thing about church is. Together we're holding it. Right? That made me feel.
Yeah.
I guess, who decides what is heresy?
Mm-hmm.
You know, back to the Nicene Creed guys.
Right.
You know, when only half of the folks were represented.
Yeah.
Who gets to decide what's orthodox and what's heresy?
Yeah. And because we have said already that the ecumenical councils that were held are not repeatable at this time,
What do you do about it?
that book is closed in a lot of ways, right? At least that's the argument that a lot of people would make, is that at this point, can you honestly do that and still call it ecumenical?
And did they get it right?
Yeah, yes.
When you think of when the last Nicene Creed was developed, hundreds of years ago,
Yeah,
and we've all evolved, maybe we're more modern, maybe we look at things in different ways.
yeah,
Maybe more open ways, maybe we have more education and understanding. And so does that mean,
Yeah.
I mean, there's some basic things that still are what we believe, but would it ever be changed or updated or altered in some way to make it fit with?
and a really great example that I like to point to was the creed that we say on Sundays took more than 50 years to be completed. They didn't write the entire thing in one sitting. That entire last paragraph about the Holy Spirit didn't exist until 50 plus years later. I'm getting the signal that I need to get ready for the service. So, hope to see you actually, we won't be doing this next week. It'll be the following week. Next week's Labor Day weekend, so I figured probably not a great opportunity. So stew on this, and then I'll see you on the other side. Thank you for coming.